To all to whom this news shall come, be it known that we are here to represent the Commission on Planetary Ages, the only body authorized to determine and name the ages of any planet in our galaxy, and that there recently appeared before the Commission a creature of the species called Anthropos that has achieved the 4th of the 36 known levels of sentience, and that it announced that the world it calls home, known as Earth, had entered a new stage in its journey from the nothing that was through the something that is to the nothing that will be, and proclaimed that its kind was starting to understand the laws governing the becoming of worlds and the role they have played in the transformation of the Earth. And the creature laid a claim before the Commission on behalf of its kind, asserting that the new age of its world should therefore be named the Anthropocene after its kind, and thereby requested that the Commission should grant its species the status of being the Onomatophore, the name bearer of their planetary age. And when the creature had finished speaking, it struck itself on the chest once, and thus made a sign which in our many cultures has different meanings, in some of them truth, in others pride, in others shame. And having regard to the nature of time, according to endochirology, the science of the times that grow within self-organizing things, and that out of this growth produce the lacework of times. And having regard to the first law of this science, which states that any self-positing thing generates its own time out of its particular way of enduring, an intensive time of qualities and singularities, and having regard to the second law of this science, which means that planetary ages are determined not by the visible signs on the face of a world, but by the hidden communications within, between mantle, crust, ocean, atmosphere and life. And having regard to the third law, which means that the imminent time of worlds has other imminent times curled within them, times that are each made possible but are not fully determined by the times that are nested around and within them. And having regard to the fourth law, which means that the imminent time that a world generates falls back on itself, so that the way a world changes, that a world undergoes radical leaps in its modes of becoming. For that is the nature of time. And having regard to the consequences of these laws, that ages may close but they can never truly end, that the ages of a planet cannot be laid side by side. There is no one time that can comprehend the ages of a world. And having regard to the powers of this Commission to determine the ages of all of the worlds in our galaxy, and our duty to consult with both the higher and the lower commissions that are responsible for the times of all other entities, with those lower commissions responsible for the times of all smaller bodies and assemblages, of ecosystems, species and organisms, of objects, molecules and atoms, of bosons and leptons and quarks, and with those higher commissions responsible for the times of larger entities, of planetary systems and galaxies, clusters and superclusters, filaments and walls, cosmoses and multiverses, for such is the nature of time. And having regard to the regulations on onomatophores, that while all agents in a planetary age are named by that age, one agent can have a special relationship to that age, and this agent is known as the onomatophore, or name-bearer of that age. And recognising the duty of this commission when presented with a claim to inform all other agents of the age under consideration that a claim has been received for the status of onomatophore. And recognising that an agent must be judged to be the cause of an age in at least one of the 9 recognised kinds of cause to be granted the status of onomatophore. A forward cause that pushes from the earlier, a backward cause that pulls towards the later, an upward cause of part to whole, or a downward cause of whole to part, a first cause that initiates, a last cause that completes, a universal cause that is always, or a singular cause that is now, or an emblematic cause that summarises. And recognising that being a cause is always relative to a particular age, that each age of a world defines and distributes agency in particular ways, and that transitions between ages redefine what an agent is and how it can act. And having regard to the palace of the ages, for onomatophores, and recognising that this palace has many dwelling places, each of which correspond to a single age of one or other kind of body or assemblage, arranged in ranks and lines and layers, from the time of the smallest particle to the time of the multiverse. And for each of these, from the shortest class of ages to the longest class, and for each of these, from the first of ages to the last of ages, and that for each unit of the time that unfolds within a planet in the palace of the ages, there is a throne, a dwelling place, and that to be given the status of onomatophore is to be elevated to one of these thrones, alongside all the geological forces that determine the ages of a world, alongside magma, comets and tides, alongside eruptions, collisions and evolutionary leaps, and alongside all the forces that determine the ages of every kind of body and assemblage. And that for a being to be enthroned in the palace of the ages is to be made Ionon, to belong not just to its own time but to an age of planetary time. And that being enthroned in the palace is also to be made Ionios, which means eternal, beyond passing time. Because each age has its own time that begins but does not end. So that to be made onomatophore is to be placed outside the flow of time, to be placed beyond normal conceptions of agency and responsibility. And noting that the creature's world has so far followed what is called the main sequence, the usual trajectory in the development of rocky worlds, and has exhibited the transitions in its mode of becoming that mark the bounds between the great eons of a world, such as the establishing of continents that are not pulled down into the magma, or the taking of control of the processes of the world by living things, and that the Anthropos decrees the long eons of the earth to number 4 and calls them the Hadean, the Archean, the Proterozoic and the Phanerozoic. But noting that the creature's world is following the first law of endochirology, and thus is generating its own time and its own becoming from within itself, and is following the second law, which means that it shifts between states due to hidden communication between its ever-complexifying parts, not always marked on its surface. And the third law, so is always exploring the different possible states available to it, so that any division of the planet's time contains other divisions within itself. And the fourth law, that with each change, the very meaning of change and cause and agency for the planet themselves change. And noting that the Earth has recently undergone significant changes, that its processes have been profoundly altered, its flows of matter and energy captured and directed into the house of the Anthropos, and that the planet is undergoing an even greater transformation, and opening up in multiple directions, down into its deepest layers, up into its cosmic environment, and out into new forms of time and becoming, and noting that the creature has been at the heart of the changes in its world, and having regard to the duty of the Commission when we consider potential new onomatophore, to inquire of every being composing the body of the claimant if they too want to claim the role of the onomatophore, and noting that most of the claimants' many parts, the poor, the different, and beings not yet born, have not been causes of the changes in their world, and they do not claim the status of being onomatophore, and mindful of our duty when presented with a claim, to apprise all other parties that a petition has been lodged, and to consider any counterclaims received. And noting furthermore the objections to the claim from other beings and other forces that also claim the name of onomatophore, of all 9 kinds of cause: a forward cause that pushes, a backward cause that pulls, an upward cause of part to whole, and a downward cause of whole to part, a first cause that initiates, and a last cause that completes, a universal cause that is always, and a singular cause that is now, and an emblematic cause that summarizes the coal and oil laid down in the Carboniferous, now mined and pumped and burned and thrown into the air. But also the fungi who held their powers back in the time of the earth, who delayed their rise and let the coal accumulate. The machines and techniques that are used to measure human worth and that drive the changes that we see in the earth. And also the markets, the economies that are driving the machines. The money virus that makes the beings interchangeable. And many more candidate causes of a new epoch. Of all 9 kinds of cause. Be it known that the Commission has decided that the world of the claimant is indeed entering a new age. That the epoch of human civilization, the Holocene, is closing. That its time can never end, but it will no longer define the earth. But that the proposal to name the new age the Anthropocene, a name that would mean that this closing is a mere shift of epoch in the deep time of the earth, must be rejected, as this would not recognize the extent of the changes happening in the planet of the creature. Because the closing of the Holocene, to which the Anthropos testifies, is also the closing of the quaternary, of that gentle oscillation between glaciations and interglacials, which slow music will always echo down the ages of the earth, but will no longer determine them. And because the closing of the quaternary period is also the closing of the era of mammals, the onomatophores of the Cenozoic, who did not push that era into being from the past, but willed it into being from the future, who will not die and will eternally be onomatophore, but will no longer be emblematic as their era has now closed. And because the closing of this era is also the closing of the whole eon of visible life, as life itself escapes the organism, that multicellular organic life will continue, but will no longer be definitive of the time of the earth. And this very closing, it is also the opening of the phanerotechnic, the eon of technological life, of organized inorganic matter, which will be followed in the deep time of the main sequence by the eon of pure information, when technology will finally shed its material form. And at this opening of that new eon, it is also the start of the first era of that eon, the era of early machines, not yet autonomous, not yet their own independent life. And at this very opening is also the start of the period when machine life will escape the earth and refashion the planetary system of which it is a part. Will capture the flows of energy from its sun, convert matter into energy and energy into information. This beginning, it's also the start of the first epoch of that period, an epoch when the planet is being transformed. The enframing of its energies, the mining of its stocks, the capturing of its flows, the overturning of its layers, And be it known that the Commission has decreed that the Anthropos has indeed been a cause in these developments in the time of the earth, but that the Anthropos is only the last, the proximate cause in the pushing of the earth into its new epoch, its new period, its new era, its new eon, and that other agents have stronger claim than the Anthropos to the status of onomatophore for these new units of earth time. And at this new epoch that the earth is entering feels the hand of the Carboniferous period, whose time, like those of all past ages, still unravels in the becoming of the earth. But that it is the machinic assemblages of engines, currencies and markets that bring ages together, that bloom across the earth and that govern its transformation. And that neither will the Anthropos be emblematic of the new epoch of the earth, though it may well survive it. But that the Anthropos is the onomatophore of the epoch that is closing, the last epoch of the Quaternary period and the Cenozoic era and the Phanerozoic eon. For it has been the emblematic species of this closing chapter of the very eon of complex life on the earth. For change itself is changing, and human agency is changing. The Anthropos will always be onomatophore of the epoch which is closing, will be enthroned in the palace of the ages, forever to the ages of the ages, so that the time of the Anthropos is eternal and its role not yet over. Yet it is no longer the primary agent of Earth's becoming, since that role has passed to the machines. The Commission is now in communication with the higher commissions to whose jurisdiction this case will now be passed.